What kind of monster leaves a child's shoe dangling from a tree branch in the middle of a forest, miles from anywhere, with no trace of the boy who wore it? The small town of Willow Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of Oregon, was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, and the biggest scandal was Mrs. Harper's cat getting stuck in the church steeple. That was until October 12, when 9-year-old Tommy Hayes disappeared. It started as a crisp fall afternoon, the kind where the air smells of pine and damp earth, and the leaves crunch underfoot like brittle secrets. By nightfall, it turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Tommy was a quiet kid, the kind who'd rather sketch birds in his notebook than kick a soccer ball with the other boys. His mom, Sarah Hayes, said he'd been out in the backyard, drawing a red-tailed hawk he'd seen perched on the fence. She'd stepped inside to stir the soup simmering on the stove, just for a minute, she swore, and when she came back, he was gone. His pencil lay snapped in half on the grass, his notebook open to a half-finished sketch, but Tommy vanished. Police came quickly. Sheriff Dan Carver, a broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by too many summers and winters, organized a search party by dusk. Neighbors, volunteers, even the high school football team fanned out across Willow Creek, their flashlights slicing through the thickening fog. They checked the creek, the old barn by the Miller place, and the playground where Tommy sometimes sat alone. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a whisper. Then, at 2 a.m., a call came over the radio that made Carver's blood run cold. A hiker, a guy named Paul Grayson who'd been camping 10 miles out in Blackwood Forest, had found something. When he arrived, Grayson was pale, his hands trembling as he pointed to a low branch on an ancient oak. There, swaying gently in the night breeze, was a single sneaker, Tommy's sneaker, bright blue with a scuff mark on the toe. Sarah had described it perfectly when she'd filed the report. How the hell did it get out here? Carver muttered, his voice low as he scanned the dark woods. Blackwood Forest was dense, sprawling, the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear. There were no roads nearby, no trails a kid could have wandered down. And yet, here was Tommy's shoe, like a breadcrumb in a twisted fairy tale. The search intensifies. By morning, Blackwood Forest was crawling with people, state troopers, FBI agents, search dogs, and a swarm of reporters buzzing like flies. Sarah stood at the edge of the forest, clutching Tommy's notebook, her eyes red and hollow. He wouldn't run off, she kept saying, her voice breaking. He's afraid of the dark. The dogs picked up a scent near the oak tree, but it was faint, muddled by the damp earth and the wind that had kicked up overnight. They followed it for half a mile before it just stopped. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing but that damn shoe. The FBI brought in a profiler, Agent Emily Voss, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s with a reputation for cracking impossible cases. She studied the scene, her lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't random, she said to Carver, her voice steady but laced with something dark. Someone brought him here. Someone who knew how to cover their tracks. Theories started flying. A drifter passing through town. A predator who'd been watching Tommy for weeks. Even old man Pritchard, the recluse who lived on the edge of Willow Creek and muttered to himself about government conspiracies, got dragged in for questioning. But Pritchard was half-blind and could barely lift a shovel, let alone kidnap a kid. Every lead fizzled out. Then, on the third day, a break. A grainy security camera from a gas station 15 miles south of the forest caught something. At 6:47 p.m. on the day Tommy vanished, a dark green sedan pulled up. The driver, a man in a hooded jacket, stepped out, paid in cash for a tank of gas, and drove off. In the passenger seat, barely visible through the tinted window, was a small figure. The clerk, a bored teenager named Riley, didn't think much of it until the footage aired on the news. Looked like a kid, Riley said, shrugging. Didn't see his face. The car's license plate was too blurry to read, but Voss latched onto it like a lifeline. That's our guy, she said, replaying the tape until the screen flickered. He took Tommy out of Willow Creek, brought him to the forest, and left the shoe as a marker. But why? The investigation shifted to Blackwood Forest. Teams combed every inch, their boots sinking into the muddy ground, their shouts echoing off the trees. On day 5, they found something else, a scrap of fabric snagged on a thorn bush, about a mile from the oak tree. It was from Tommy's jacket, a blue windbreaker with a rip on the sleeve. Sarah broke down when they showed it to her, sobbing into her hands as Carver tried to find words that didn't sound hollow. The forest was merciless. Rain poured down that night, washing away any hope of more evidence. The dogs lost the scent again. And the volunteers started dropping off, exhaustion and despair settling in. But Voss wouldn't let it go. She spent hours poring over maps, cross-referencing old cases, looking for patterns. "He's playing with us," she said one night, her voice tight. "The shoe, the jacket, it's a game." Carver didn't like that word, game. It made his stomach twist. He'd seen bad things in his 20 years as sheriff, bar fights, car wrecks, a meth lab explosion that took out half a trailer park, but nothing like this. This was cold, calculated, evil. On day 7, a tip came in. A woman named Clara Evans, who lived in a cabin on the outskirts of the forest, called the hotline. She'd seen a green sedan parked near her property the evening Tommy went missing. "Didn't think much of it at the time," she said, her voice crackling over the phone. "Folks park out here sometimes to hike. But it stayed there a while, maybe an hour, then drove off fast." Clara's cabin was remote, accessible only by a winding dirt road that barely qualified as a path. When Carver and Voss got there, the tire tracks were still visible in the mud, deep, fresh, like the car had peeled out in a hurry. Voss crouched down, running her fingers along the tread marks. "He was here," she said. And he wasn't alone. The tire tracks gave them something concrete. The state lab matched them to a common brand used on mid-90s sedans, narrowing the search. Voss put out an APB for any dark green sedans spotted in Oregon or neighboring states, and the media ran with it, plastering sketches of the hooded man across every TV screen from Portland to Seattle. Meanwhile, Sarah was unraveling. She hadn't slept in days, surviving on coffee in the faint hope that Tommy was still alive. She started leaving voicemails on his little flip phone, the one he'd begged for last Christmas, even though the police said it was dead, last pinged near the forest on the day he disappeared. "Come home, baby," she'd whisper, her voice trembling. "Mommy's waiting." On day 10, a breakthrough. A patrol officer in a town called Elkwood, 30 miles south, spotted a green sedan abandoned in a ditch off Highway 17. The plates were missing, the VIN scratched out, but inside was a treasure trove, a candy wrapper from a brand Tommy loved, a single blonde hair that matched his color, and a faint smear of blood on the back seat. DNA confirmed it, Tommy had been in that car. The discovery lit a fire under the investigation. Volunteers flooded back into Blackwood Forest, search choppers buzzed overhead, and Voss pushed the team harder than ever. "He's close," she said, her eyes burning with determination. "He ditched the car because he knows we're onto him." But close wasn't enough. The forest was a labyrinth, full of ravines and caves and shadows that swallowed light. On day 12, they found the cave, a narrow slit in a rocky outcrop, hidden by overgrown vines. Inside, the air was damp and sour, the walls slick with moss. And there, in the dirt, was a sight that stopped Carver's heart, Tommy's other sneaker, caked in mud, lying next to a pile of small bony bones weren't human. Thank God, just a rabbit, picked clean by something with sharp teeth. But the shoe was Tommy's, no question. The cave became the new focal point, and forensic teams descended, combing every inch. They found more, a broken flashlight, a torn piece of rope, and faint scratches on the rock wall that looked like fingernails. Voss's theory hardened into certainty. "He kept him here," she said. "Maybe not long, but long enough." Sarah refused to believe it was over. "He's alive," she insisted, clutching Tommy's notebook as if it could summon him back. I'd feel it if he wasn't. But the evidence was mounting, and hope was slipping through their fingers like sand. On day 15, a hunter stumbled across the body. It was in a shallow ravine, half buried under leaves and dirt, about 3 miles from the cave. Tommy Hayes, his blue windbreaker stained with blood, his small hands curled into fists like he'd fought until the end. The coroner later confirmed it, blunt force trauma to the head, dead for at least a week. The killer had struck him, likely with a rock, and left him there to rot. Sarah's scream when they told her echoed through the sheriff's station, a sound Carver would never forget. The town mourned, laying flowers and teddy bears at the edge of the forest, while the investigation turned to a manhunt. Who was the man in the hooded jacket? Why Tommy? And where was he now? The answer came on day 20. A trucker in Idaho called in a tip. He'd picked up a hitchhiker matching the sketch, a wiry guy in his 40s with a scar across his left cheek. The trucker dropped him off near Boise, but not before the guy let slip something odd. Said he used to live in Oregon, the trucker told police. Said he hated the rain. Voss cross-referenced the description with old records and hit gold. Michael Ray Dennison, 43, a former logger from Willow Creek who'd left town 6 years ago after a string of petty crimes. He'd been quiet back then, unremarkable, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But there was one detail that stuck out. A neighbor had once complained about him watching kids at the playground, though nothing came of it. Dennison's last known address was a rundown trailer in Elkwood, just blocks from where the sedan was found. When police raided it, they found a shrine, photos of Tommy clipped from the local paper, a map of Blackwood Forest with the cave circled, and a journal filled with rambling entries. One line, dated the day Tommy vanished. Chilled Voss to the bone, the boy's quiet now. No more birds to draw. Dennison had planned it. He'd seen Tommy in the backyard, lured him with some lie, maybe a promise to show him a nest, and driven him to the forest. The shoe on the branch? A taunt, a sick trophy. The car, the cave, the killing, it was all part of his twisted game. Dennison was arrested 2 days later, hiding in a motel outside Boise. He didn't resist, just smirked as they cuffed him, his scarred face lit by the flashing lights. At trial, he claimed insanity, but the jury didn't buy it. Life without parole, the judge said, and Willow Creek exhaled, but the town was never the same. Sarah moved away, unable to bear the empty house. Carver retired, haunted by that shoe swaying in the breeze. And Blackwood Forest? People stopped going there, whispering that it was cursed. The hook from the beginning, the monster who left Tommy's shoe in the tree, had an answer now. It was Michael Ray Dennison, a man who'd once been invisible, hiding in plain sight until he chose to strike. The why of it died with Tommy, buried in that ravine, leaving only questions and a pair of sneakers that would never be worn again.